come once again to discuss things.
Hello, boys and ghouls. It's your old pal Scythe Part 2 here, joined by my evil friends, the real maggots.
Hello.
And Rotten Debile. For another episode of Ghouly Gentlemen. Yep, we're still going with that. We're still going with that as the intro for Geeky Gentlemen Horror Month. So hi everyone. We are doing horror movie reviews all throughout the month of October for the main episodes of Geeky Gentlemen, and Ruben has chosen our horror movie this time around. What are we reviewing, sir?
We are talking about the 1922 silent film Nosferatu.
Indeed. And so this is interesting because I just want to go over kind of the history of Horror Month. We have talked about Bram Stoker's Dracula. We have talked about, I'm not sure if it was on Horror Month, but I know we've done an episode on Nosferatu the Vampire, the 1970 remake of this. And now we're talking about the original silent film, Nosferatu. So, in an odd way, we've talked about the Nosferatu movie 3 times because, I shit you not, Bram Stoker's Dracula is more a remake of Nosferatu than it is a adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So just it's interesting that we've kind of come full circle and we keep returning to this topic, albeit with different people.
We can talk about Shadow of the Vampire next if you want.
What's that one? I don't think I've heard of that one.
It stars Willem Dafoe and I can't remember the name of the actor.
Graf? No, that's the character.
No, the actor who the actor is in the movie where there are people, the actors.
Max Schreck?
The actor who, like, in that movie where people were getting into his head.
Oh, John Malkovich.
John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe are in a movie called Shadow of the Vampire, and it's about the making of Nosferatu. And the twist of the story is Max Schreck was an actual vampire.
I've seen the trailer for it. That looks really funny. I really want to watch that movie.
Oh my. Well, maybe one day.
Yeah.
So, Ruben, what made you want to talk about this, though?
I had it on DVD. I have this 50 horror movie set, which is like 45 garbage movies and like 5 good movies. And this is one of them that is at least one you've heard of before. And I had seen it before a few years ago, and I hadn't seen it since, and I wanted to kind of dig it back out and see what other people thought of it.
Okay, all right. I know this is kind of like a big deal to the film buff society kind of thing. This is like kind of the holy grail of the silent era for dramatic film. A lot of the silent movies that are remembered tend to be more the comedies, which is weird because comedy tends to be the least lasting genre in a lot of other ways. But for silent film, it's kind of stuck. But Nosferatu is one of the exceptions there. It's one of the silent films that's like actually maintained a reputation and a lot of respect. So I thought it was an interesting choice to do that. Manos, you seemed pretty excited when I asked you about coming on for this, didn't you?
Yeah, I love Nosferatu, and I would, if you don't mind, if I disagree with you a little bit. I think I half agree with you. Out of the silent era, comedies and also horror films are best remembered. Because there's Nosferatu and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, as well as the Golem, and of course Phantom of the Opera. And nobody really talks about dramas from these years. Maybe The Man Who Laughs, but that was more. That was. It looks like a horror film, but it's kind of a drama. People tend to either want to laugh or be scared, and the dramas. There were dramas during this period. Nobody gives a crap about them.
Yeah, and then there's like the action films. Like I'm a big Zorro fan, and Douglas Fairbanks' The Mask of Zorro, The Mark of Zorro. That's still like a big deal, but it's not really remembered as fondly. Like I don't feel like I hear people talk about those as much as I hear people talk about Nosferatu and Chaplin's films and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is interesting. Like the two genres that get like almost no respect. Wes Craven, of course, said that no one's ever going to give an Academy Award to a horror film, and that's the reason to make them.
Yeah.
And so it's like they get very little respect, but they're very important films, like historically speaking, for the silent era. So it's just really interesting.
Just a quick question. What was the Jordan Peele? It was the one with the.
Get Out?
Yeah, didn't that win an Academy Award?
It was nominated. I think it actually won screenplay.
Okay, cool.
This past year was an interesting year for horror because Jordan Peele's Get Out won Best Screenplay, and Shape of Water won Best Picture, which isn't 100% a horror film, but there's a lot of horror aspects to it.
No, definitely. And I mean, to be fair, Wes Craven was talking in the 90s.
Oh, yeah, and he's still right. I mean, it's still not respected. This past year was a fluke. The year that Silence of the Lambs was doing very well at the Oscars, that was kind of a fluke, too. The shift for the Oscars usually defaults towards more dramas or important films, and comedies and horror kind of get left behind.
By and large, they do. So it's just interesting to think about it from a historical lens there. So I guess I'll be the odd man out here, though. Even though I'll recognize the importance of this film, even though I can like sit here and I'll probably talk about this is well done. Silent films are a fucking slog for me, man. I had to. This is split up into 5 acts in the cut that I watched. And I had to take a minute or two in between each cut and just go do something because otherwise I was going to fall asleep. And that's it. A lot of that just has to do with me. I'm not going to hold the film accountable for that. A lot of that has to do with me and the fact that I was born in 1990. I am a modern film watcher. I am a modern film audience member. And so I am used to modern pacing. And I am a firm believer that if you were to take something with dynamite modern pacing, like a Tarantino film or like the episode the thing I always go to isn't a film, but still, the first episode of Sherlock, the BBC series, has such fucking lightning fast dynamite pacing and editing that I guarantee if you showed that to an audience in the 30s and they got their heads blown by the fact that it even had sound and color, if you can get them to ignore that part and just pay attention, they will still not be able to tell what the fuck is going on because the pacing's too fast for them. And likewise, the pacing of classic films, not just silent films, but a lot of classic films, even going up into the 70s, is just way too slow for me. It's crazy the way that pacing in film has evolved. And so when I watch stuff like this, I'm like, all right, just make sure you're paying attention. And I was trying my best. I really just have to focus on it, and I have a really hard time doing that. Even toward the end, I was legit nodding off. And there's like a specific music cue at one point when the camera's on Ellen, and I was like legit nodding off. The music cue scared me back awake. So on one level, this horror film did scare me, but not probably in the way it intended to. So yeah, I'm about probably the odd man out here in that, like, I'll recognize the importance of this film, but by no stretch of the imagination do I enjoy this film.
Well, I mean, I obviously disagree with that. I do have a great love for this movie. It's one of I remember having moments in my childhood where I'd see photographs from this film, and they'd be a number of photographs of Nosferatu and some of the creepy poses, or the shadow play where you see his shadow creep up the stairs. And as a little kid, that terrified me. And then, of course, I did see the film. Man, God, I think I saw the film in my 20s eventually for the first time, and I found it beautiful. I mean, it's it is a literal moving work of art, telling the Dracula story, which I had already was familiar with. I will agree with you that silent movies can be a hard sit for me. Like I mentioned, that dramas are not very well remembered. That's because their silent dramas are boring. Very, very boring. I mentioned The Man Who Laughs. That's mostly a drama. Some of those images of him are really creepy and cool and well done, but the rest of the movie is dull. I actually did fall asleep. Lindsay and I tried to watch it once, and I just dropped dead. I couldn't even pretend. But this film, I don't have that feeling with, and I don't have that feeling with Phantom of the Opera, and I don't know. There's so much visual storytelling in this one, and there's just so much to look at. Of course, when you watch a film like this today, you do have also the added benefit of historical reference, where you can watch a film like this and you can see the origins of the shit you like now, and how that's influenced a lot of the filmmakers that you've been a fan of, and it's influence on top of influence, and everybody goes back and steals from this film, which is ironic because they stole the story to make this movie. And for generations to come, people will steal from this. I've stolen from this. I've created a character in my novel named Ursula Orlok.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, it was straight well, I'm gonna name the evil vampire after Count Orlok and just get away with it.
I would say the biggest thing that this movie had, the biggest impact it's had on pop culture, is that Count Orlok is weak against sunlight, which
yes.
I don't believe that's a thing in the book Dracula, and I don't. If all the the Hammer movies, if they hadn't taken that into their lore, that probably wouldn't have made it into literally every vampire thing of the 20th century. But because this kind of influenced the Hammer Dracula movies, those kind of, it is a ripple effect. So yeah, that's a big one. I was reading about this on Internet Movie Database, and it was saying that this is the first time a Dracula story has had him be weak against sunlight. And I was thinking about it. I was like, I guess that's true. I didn't realize this was the earliest instance of that.
Correct. Yeah, he was stabbed, and I think beheaded in the novel, if I remember right. And he was killed with the stake off camera in the original Bela Lugosi film. So yeah, this is the first one to actually just add that to the mythos, and we all accept it. Even people who haven't seen this film, accept it. That went through cartoons and parodies and legit films, the Hammer films you said.
Mm-hmm. So, Ruben, what were your general thoughts on this then?
Well, I agree with you. I'm not going to go out of my way to watch a silent movie. And I don't think this is a very scary movie. It's funny that you guys both brought up comedy and horror, because there are a couple of times watching this where I legitimately laughed out loud, and I don't same. There was one part where when Count Orlok is looking at the picture of his wife, and by the way, I don't know what version you guys watched, but mine actually called the character Count Dracula. The one that I watched.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I don't know which version, because I guess this movie's in the public domain now.
It is,
but,
yeah.
The one I had, it was pretty much all the names of the characters from the novel, except instead of Mina, it was Nina with an N. And then there was, like, instead of Lucy having, well, you know, that's a later thing, but so all the characters are called, like, Dracula and Renfield and Harker, but when he's looking at a picture, he says, "Oh, what a beautiful throat she has," and like I thought that was funny. I thought that was actually, and like if that line made it into a movie now, that would be like in the what's that vampire movie, Ian, you and I were talking about, the What We Do in the Shadows. Yeah. That looks like something they would put in that movie. And like, and it's hard for me to get scared by horror anyway. I think modern horror often cheats. Like, the best way you can scare an audience is like doing a musical. Like, you know, it's really soft, kind of slow, creepy music, and then suddenly like slamming your hand on the piano and like scaring everyone. Like, that's not really horror. That's just like a shock, a mild shock or whatever. And
or worse, a surprise.
Yeah.
Like, boo! Ah!
Or like jump scares. Like, you know, like you got a character walking down a hall and it's quiet, and then they turn around and somebody jumps out, or like a monster's right there. And, you know, it's not scary. You're just like, you know, it's a trick, basically. And this being a silent film, they can't take advantage of any of those things because of the technological limits. And also, those things weren't really invented. Yeah. And so it's not scary, which a lot of times when I watch a horror movie, I want to be scared, and sometimes I am, and sometimes I'm not. And sometimes I'm just a coward, and I can't go through with a movie if it is scary. But, like...
horror movies don't scare me, except when they scare me too much to watch them.
So I like watching this because, like Mano said, it's a very interesting to look at it historically. I think the visual design of Count Orlok is very interesting. And it had been a little while since I had seen it, so I remembered thinking at the beginning of the movie, like, hang on a second, he's supposed to look kind of like a goblin, but he's also supposed to pass for a human being. How are they going to do that? And they're basically doing the thing that Spock did in Star Trek 4, where it's like, just put a headband around his ears, and he looks more or less like a human. So I was amused watching this, but I wouldn't call it it's not a horror movie like what you know of horror today.
True.
Mm-hmm. And you know, it couldn't be, because this influenced things. You know, something has to create it, which I comprehend. You know, I want to go back just a little bit to the line you had about she has a beautiful throat. It seems like there's always something really awkward or weird with like a double entendre with Dracula. Yeah. Like in the Bela Lugosi and the Coppola movies, the line gets changed to "I never drink wine." Like there's always that double entendre with Dracula, and so I don't know. It's always interesting that that's there. And it even goes back to the to Nosferatu. I cannot recall if there's a line like that in the book. There probably is. I just don't know what it is. It's funny though, the way that works out. So I think, you know, we've kind of danced around it, and for those that don't know the history of it, I'm only like mildly aware. I took like a history of film class, and there were a couple questions about this. So some of the history of this film in particular is really interesting, because Bram Stoker's family was still alive when this film came out, and it is a no-holds-barred absolute ripoff of Dracula.
Yeah.
And so, just for those that didn't know, Bram Stoker's family sued the filmmakers, and they won, because of course they should have won. And so every copy of this film was ordered to be destroyed. And luckily it wasn't.
Yeah, that's amazing of luck. This is essentially the first Asylum film. If you really look at it that way. Except it's probably their best one. So, and, yeah, it's amazing that someone, either through, I don't know if it was through negligence that, I forgot to burn this one, or somebody, like, had the forethought of this probably should be kept and thought of, because so many classic films have been like lost, like the Lon Chaney Sr. film, London After Midnight, is lost.
Metropolis.
Parts of Metropolis is lost. Yeah.
Metropolis is still incomplete after all these years.
Which is crazy because that movie, as is like 2.5 hours long. I watched that one
amazing.
one time too, and then it was like there's scenes missing, and it's that long.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, thank God somebody was able to find it. Yeah, and you are correct in that. Like, that was kind of the situation. Back then, they were like, oh, hey, nobody's paying attention in Germany. Let's make our own movie.
And
pretty much.
Apparently, the ending where he dies from sunlight as opposed to being stabbed and being beheaded, apparently the director specifically said we have to do a different ending so that they can't say it's exactly the same movie. But of course, it's still exactly the same movie. Like, you know, same characters, same plot points up until the last 2 minutes of the movie. But, like, I don't know. I think that's interesting that, like, the one thing that this movie, like, the most it contributes to pop culture was there just so that he could legally say it's a slightly different movie. And then it ended up, he still lost the court case.
Mm.
Yeah, and, you know, the thing that's interesting about it, though, is it is significantly different in the way that adaptation tends to be. So, like, you know, we're all geeks here, so it's easiest to relate this to, like, comic book movies, and we've certainly gotten more tolerant of it, and it's not the kind of complaint you hear anymore, but I'm sure everyone remembers Joker didn't kill Batman's parents in the comics. That whole fucking thing of, like, it's not this way in the comics, it's not this way, it's not this way. And we all get very annoyed with that argument now, but for a long time that was an argument that stuck where, you know, things would adapt existing property and kind of condense characters or change things up, and fans would bitch. But, like, this is, you know, because it's early film, it's one of the first things to adapt a popular work at the time. You know, like, they just condense characters in this, and it's had a lasting impact because we're still doing that shit. The characters of Lucy and Mina get combined and condensed together and get their roles reversed and switched around.
Yeah.
So fucking much in adaptations of Dracula, it is goddamn impossible to comprehend, including in the one that was meant to be a direct adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, because really it was just a remake of this.
Well, speaking of, like, adaptations, like, changing things, Lucy in this is already married, and her husband is buddies with Harker, or whatever his name is in the version you watch. And
Hunter.
Okay. So, like, in the novel, she's got, like, 5 guys who are all asking to marry her in the same day, and I don't mind at all having all that get cut out of any adaptation of Dracula, because when you try and shove all of those characters into a movie, they're all vying for screen time, and you're either going to have a movie with, like, 5 different characters who all are kind of a protagonist, but none of them are a full protagonist, or you're going to have a movie with one protagonist and a whole bunch of side characters who barely get a line of dialogue each. And I don't mind getting rid of those characters and just focusing on Harker, Dracula, Renfield, Nina, whatever, you know, just focus on these main characters. You don't have to bring in these 4 guys who are all interested in getting in Lucy's pants.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something interesting to that. You know, it's funny, Ruben, you and I did the video on Van Helsing. There is something really interesting that you've got 5 strapping young men, and then you've got this old professor, and really the guy that's responsible for killing Dracula is not the traditional square-jawed hero, it's the old professor. So, like, when you take those characters out, you do lose something. I don't think you can deny that, but that's more a discussion of Dracula. You know, fuck it, next year, Horror Month, we're reviewing the novel. Fuck it. We're coming full circle with this bitch.
I need to start reading it now, then get a head start.
Yeah, it's a big one. But no, like, that's totally thing though, the way the characters get condensed for adaptation. It's totally fine. It's just this is what starts it in a way. Like, obviously there were other film adaptations of novels and stuff before Nosferatu, but like Nosferatu's the one that stuck and the one that kind of made it okay, in my opinion. And it's just like, Jesus, it's everywhere now, and it's because of the impact of Nosferatu. It's changed the way we adapt Dracula. It's like everything that wants to adapt Dracula goes to Nosferatu, which is in and of itself an imperfect adaptation, and that's weird.
See, I think that also adds. I think the fact that this film was missing for a good period of time added to its allure, because all we had in some cases were just photographs and stills from the film. You know, I don't remember when it was eventually found. I think it was like in the 70s or 60s.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
See, I know that I was reading that this film was banned in Sweden for decades because it was too horrifying, apparently, in Sweden. But then eventually they let up on it. But it was like a really recent year when they let up on, like, when they undid the ban, and I was surprised how late it was.
Yeah, I don't remember how long it was missing, but yeah, it was quite a bit. And you know, when you're not there, that kind of creates this kind of like murmur and, you know, discussion of what we think the film is and how cool it is, and, you know, especially when you have just images of Nosferatu himself, which Max Schreck is just, you know, he looks amazing. You know, this film is about to hit 100 years in just a few years. I think 4 or 5 years from now, and we are still blown away by it. It still creates an emotion when you see him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, it's a really fucking cool, monstrous Dracula design, you know? You just don't get that anymore. We've gone for all our sexy Draculas, and now it's kind of interesting because, like, for a while the sexy vampire was kind of the subversion, and, you know, we slowly got to the point where we had to flip-flop on that the other way around to make a monstrous vampire the subversion of the subversion.
Mm-hmm.
So we've gone back and forth on that since this movie came out, because you had, like, the vampire get sexier and sexier until you got things like Interview with a Vampire and Twilight, and then everyone got annoyed with Twilight and their sexy, sparkly vampires, and so we got more monstrous vampires again. And I don't know, it's just interesting. And then you of course had things kind of blend the two over the years. You had the Coppola film. Gary Oldman starts off looking not exactly like Max Schreck here, but definitely more in line with that in the beginning of the film. And then as he feeds, he gets sexier. And that's, you know, it's an interesting side. So given that this came out so close to the Victorian era, to the point where, you know, people from the Victorian era were still alive for this film, what do you think of the fact that the novel has such a critique of Victorian sexual repression, and I don't really see much of that coming through in this film? Maybe I'm wrong, though.
No, you're not wrong. I don't think that's what... I think the director's name is Murnauer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's what his focus was. Granted, another country, Germany had its own issues. I don't know what Germany was like during the Victorian period. I don't know if they had, you know, their own kind of, like, issues. This was... in the 20s, and in the 20s and early 30s, Germany was pretty rockin' place. So they didn't really approach that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That they don't focus on that side of things. It's weird though, because all the sexual imagery associated with Dracula, the novel, tends to kind of come through in a lot of other things. And so to make him so monstrous and just kind of the epitome of a non-sexy vampire, I kind of think is a little weird and counter to the story. So again, this is an adaptation, but it's an imperfect adaptation in several ways, because he's so, you know, freaky looking. That I'm sure there's someone who's got a Nosferatu fetish out there, but
everybody likes something.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't care
like,
what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
but
foghorn leghorn, yeah. Let me fuck that.
I say, boy. No, definitely. There's definitely like the weirdos out there, but this is definitely more of a just straight scary monster take on Dracula. And I don't know. I feel like you lose something of the or no, you definitely lose something of the original metaphor play there. I don't know, like how worthwhile it is, because I don't know how well you can convey that kind of imagery in the silent era, but just worth talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think it goes to, like, I've never really picked up much on, like, I mean, I guess, like, like, there's an exchange of bodily fluids, and, there's a guy who's, like, got this hypnotic thrall over his mostly female victims. So, yeah. Like,
there's puncturing and inserting.
Yeah. So, like, once you get to thinking about it, it's pretty obvious. But, like, in the moment when I'm watching any vampire movie, I'm never thinking about, well, this is clearly a critique on the sexual politics of Victoria. I'm never thinking about that. I'm just like, well, this has got, this aspect of the vampire lore is introduced in this movie. And I wonder how much people really think about that in terms of metaphor when they're doing, like, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer is famous for, like any given episode, the monster is a representation of something. And so they were probably thinking a lot about that in the 90s, but I don't know if any other vampire, like how much they're thinking about sex in, say, the Lost Boys. Or if they're just like, yeah, it's really cool because vampires are cool, and these guys are like the bad boys, and if that's all they're really thinking about. And so I'm wondering if this is like the beginning of, we're not really thinking about what the vampire is a representation of. We're just thinking about, this is a cool fantasy horror idea, and we're just kind of exploring it in this new media.
I remember that Dracula is not all that, like, super hot and sexy. I mean, he's not like Edward Cullen sexy, even in the original novel. So, if this is like the first take on that, they went for the creepier, and they went even further with him. Lugosi definitely was one of the first to bring a real, like, sexiness to the vampire, because a lot of because he got famous doing Dracula on stage, and that kind of became his thing, and of course magnified to 1 billion when he did the film. And of course that was one of those things over time, like, we saw the Frank Langella Dracula in '79, which went all in on the sexiness. I don't know if you've seen that one. He's like got his shirt all open a lot in the film, and that's a John Borman film, I think, and he goes nuts with it. And that, I think, had a lot. I think that helped propel this, and then of course, like, a few other films like Lost Boys, the Hammer films obviously has a lot of sex to them. So I think kind of came over time and kind of built, and people's reactions to the material, and then some of them, of course, got to make vampire films and novels, so they, have put that reaction into their work, and it's kind of gone, forward throughout all this time. Vampires are very much like superheroes, in that they've created their own kind of, folklore and mythos in popular Western and even Eastern cultures. And, they have their own tropes, and it's one of those things that kind of builds and, kind of creates its own and then kind of goes elsewhere. They're both kind of living organisms, really.
Yeah, no, I agree. Steve and I are apparently the only ones in the world that liked it, but like Dracula Untold really went with that. It was superhero Dracula movie, and it worked to a degree. So I guess then we should move on because Nosferatu certainly not sexy. Count Orlok can go jump in a river. One last thing I want to talk about in regards to this as an imperfect adaptation is I don't think anything's ever gotten Renfield right. Renfield's iconic for like eating bugs and shit, and yeah, that's great. But like nothing ever goes with it full on and deals with like Renfield being turned and all that stuff. Nothing ever goes into that, and it always disappoints me. And so I don't know. I'm just gonna blame Nosferatu since it's the first one to do it.
Yeah, stupid Nosferatu.
So what? It's been. I've never read the full Dracula novel. I've only read a version. It was a great illustrated classic version, and I was a child. So what is the right way to do? Like, I'm not trying to but I don't know what you mean by how they get him wrong.
Well, like, okay, so in this, Hutter, Jonathan Harker, goes to Castle Dracula and gets trapped there and everything. And everything does that.
Mm-hmm.
Everything does Harker gets sent to Castle Dracula first. It's actually Renfield first. Renfield goes first, goes crazy, comes back, and then they send Harker. So, like, Renfield's kind of our warning. And I don't know, it's weird. Nothing ever really goes with it. Basically, like, Dracula couldn't control himself the first time. Because he was around, blood. And so then Harker goes, and Dracula's able to control himself long enough so that he doesn't immediately start sucking Harker's blood until he, like, nicks his finger. Dracula controls himself long enough to sign the fucking contract. So I don't know, I see why it's definitely an economic adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
And like, to be fair, it's been since high school since I've read Dracula, so I might even be fucking up Renfield because I've been so influenced by other media. But if I'm remembering it correctly, Renfield goes first, and Dracula, instead of just sucking him dry, turns him into a familiar.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
Yeah, it's been a minute though, but like it's certainly an economic adaptation because otherwise you're just telling the same story twice of this guy who goes to sign this real estate deal with Dracula and then goes crazy living with Dracula for a very short period of time, and then comes back and is kind of crazy. And all it is the difference is Renfield gets completely turned and subservient to Dracula, and he's getting lives. Like, first it's flies, then it's spiders, then he eventually wants a cat. And, like, it's kind of a creepy big deal, and Harker is just barely able to escape without turning into Dracula's assistant, but is so... it's almost Lovecraftian. Is so deeply traumatized by the event that, like, even he refuses to read his journals about it. And because he knows it's going to send him into madness all over again. But then he kind of, like, has to confront it with Van Helsing when the situation with Lucy starts getting as bad as it does. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The best film adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula is Mel Brooks's Dracula Dead and Loving It. It's the one that is the most accurate, in my opinion. And even then, it's still pretty fucked, but it's a comedy, so it's allowed to be. Give him an enema. Really? Just to sort him out.
I feel like one of the... I want to say, didn't the Bela Lugosi one... didn't they just change Harker's name to Renfield in that?
They merged Renfield and Harker because the scenes that have Harker in them in the Lugosi film have Renfield in them. Renfield is the one who goes to meet Dracula at the beginning of the story, has the finger cut scene, has the brides who want to jump on top of him. Yeah, all that's done with Renfield. And then we cut to them. I guess they sign the papers, and they send Dracula on the boat, and of course the boat is found, in England, and everyone's dead except for Renfield, who's going crazy. Yeah, that's kind of how they get to England and Colfax Abbey.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's weird how it all kind of ties together, and ultimately it might just be some really inefficient storytelling on Bram Stoker's part, but I don't know. It's a weird one. Anyway, to circle back to Nosferatu and not so much talk about it as an imperfect adaptation, which, by the way, I don't think it's trying to be, because they're trying to legally scoot around some of the issues unsuccessfully.
Yep.
But all right, so let's talk about the big, like we've danced around it here and there, but let's talk about the big thing this has that even I can appreciate, even though I'm not much of a fan of silent film. Damn, this is well shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's no lie. There's some really, really great techniques used here, man. As you mentioned, the shadow creeping up the stairs thing. There's just some cool like effects for the time that audiences weren't sophisticated enough or didn't have enough of an understanding of film to probably comprehend how it was done. So I imagine it looked really freaky, like when Max Schreck kind of rises out of the coffin. Clearly what it is just a reversed film. It's, Max Schreck laying down in the coffin slowly, like probably being supported on his back. And then in editing, they reverse the film so it looks like he's like kind of stiffening out like a board. And it's a really, really cool effect and pretty revolutionary for the time, I think.
Oh, yes. This is the time when they're inventing this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked. There's a couple of scenes where there's one where he walks through a wall, and there's another one where it's like he's spying on Nina, or the Harker's wife. He's like spying on her, and it's like he's transparent and like he's halfway there. I really like both of those, and I know nothing about the technicality of how to make movies, so even today I wouldn't know how to do that with today's technology. So I definitely don't know how they did it back then, but I thought it looked pretty cool for 1922 technology.
Short answer, it's an overlay where the top layer is shot in the same room with a stable camera. Mm-hmm. The top layer of film is Max Schreck standing in an empty room, and then that's put over the bottom layer of film, which is Mina in the bed, and the layer with Schreck is made to be more transparent. It doesn't have as much exposure, so it's over that, and so he looks very ghostly and everything, but honestly, like, if you were to just if it were just slightly off center or something, the whole room would look like it's doubled or something. It's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Which nowadays, that's easy as fuck to do. I can do that in like 2 minutes with my digital editing, but like back then, that's a lot of work with really doing a lot to develop the film, being very, very meticulous in where you place the camera. Stuff like that would really be very hard to pull off back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to see how all that comes together. I will say, though, there's some stuff where it's like, yeah, that is amateur hour, and of course it's amateur hour because everyone was an amateur back then, but like, when he fucking loads up the coffins, and they're trying to get the sense of like, oh, he's so fast and creepy and monstrous, it just looks so silly. He's just like zooming around the fucking cart, loaded the coffins up there, and it's just cut together so sporadically, and it just looks like you throw some ragtime on that and it looks so comical.
Mm-hmm.
That and like some of the stuff with the horse carriages rushing around, they're winding the thing too fast and it looks really silly.
Yeah, are you talking about the beginning of the movie when he picks up Harker?
Yeah, and it's just like the horses are just moving at 90 miles an hour. It looks like it's kind of ridiculous.
I wonder if that was a situation where like almost like stop motion, where it's like like they just got bored with it and they didn't want to do it where it looked natural. So it's like, hey, we're just gonna like take out like a third of the frames that we would need to make it look like a more reasonable pace. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't have the time to do the full shot.
No, what I think it is shooting fast motion is really hard on those old cameras because basically the film rate, the frame rate, is determined by cranking a dial on the camera. So, like, the faster you crank the dial, the faster the rate of film is, and that's where you get the really comical things of, like, someone goes up the stairs in a whip. And so, like, that's just... It's really hard to do that because you'll notice this. It's the same kind of look with a lot of film of, like, trains or horses, horse and buggy in this case. To get the image to be stable, you have to crank it really fast to keep up with what's moving at certain speeds. And I'm kind of talking a little bit just out of theory on memory of some of this stuff. I'm not 100% on it, but I'm pretty sure that's the reason, is to get the frame rate to look good, to be able to get a clear image, you have to be cranking it really fast to keep up with the moving object. And so that's, I think, part of the reason that it happened the way it did, if you want any kind of movement in the shot.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't know any of that.
Mm-hmm. And, don't take my word for it. I could definitely be wrong about that, but that's kind of me half remembering a couple different things, oddly enough. And I'm pretty sure that's the reason for why a lot of old film like that, like old westerns and stuff, will look so jittery when they're capturing movement like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's just a symptom of the time. It looks comical now. Now, Ruben, you mentioned that there are several cuts of this movie out there. Of course there is, because it's in the public domain. So I watched a cut that's just on YouTube. I'm not sure what Manos watched. Ruben, you said you watched something on DVD. Did the cut you guys watch, was it all straight black and white, or did it have tinted films to it?
Mine did not. It was straight black and white. I watched the one, there's several versions available on Amazon Prime, and I watched the first one that seemed to have the most professional-looking thumbnail attached to it. So it was like, okay, this looks like a close to official, that you can get. And, yeah, it's all done in black and white. My version had a really nice score to it. I don't know how close it is to the original score. Probably not. And this one had English within the film, like there are scenes of them looking at books and reading off books, and there are shots of the pages that are in English.
Okay, mine were all in German.
Yeah, and the characters are all named the Dracula characters except for Nosferatu.
Okay.
The Amazon Prime one is that I found. I thought was a really good cut of it.
Okay. Ruben, did yours have any tints to it, or was it all straight black and white?
It was all straight black and white, and the pages in the book were in English, and all the characters were Dracula characters except Nina instead of Mina. But I have seen a version before that I think was on Netflix at one time, and it was tinted, but I was looking at images earlier today on Google, and apparently there's yet another version with like blue tint, and the one I saw on Netflix was like an orangish tint.
What was interesting about the one I watched on YouTube is the tint color would change to create a sense of lighting. So there's the scene where he walks into the inn before he goes to Orlok's castle, and when he's outside getting ready to walk into the inn, the film is tinted with a tealish bluish color to get the idea of nighttime outside. And then he walks inside and it gets to a yellow sepia color to give the sense of warm lighting and stuff. And then he goes to sleep that night, and he wakes up the next morning, and then the film has a pinkish reddish tint to give the idea of early morning sunrise kind of thing. Which I don't know. I could see a lot of film purists saying, no, the original director wouldn't have wanted stuff like that. Yeah, probably, but I don't know. It's a neat little thing to see. It's a neat little idea of, that's just what they had to work with at the time to kind of communicate that kind of stuff and experiment with. So I don't know. It was neat to see that, and I was curious if you guys saw anything like that.
Mine did not. Mine was pure black and white.
It was fun. I liked the idea.
Although I have seen what you're talking about. I have seen like the shaded ones before. I've seen I've seen a bunch of versions of this film over the years.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the idea of like like you and I talked a couple weeks ago about like artistic intent, like once the version of the movie is out, like does the artist really own that movie anymore, or like it? And so like this movie being in the public domain, being almost a century old, I think it's okay to say like well, his weakness being sunlight, that's a plot point in the movie, so like it's okay to do a version of the movie where you do a bluish tint to show that it's nighttime and to do a sepia tint to show that it's daytime. Like I think that makes the movie work a little better on a narrative level anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely one. I'm usually very against colorizing or adding color to black and white films, but in this case, this is one of those rare cases where it's seeming to be used to help the film and help the atmosphere. So I'm not against it at all.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It was cool little thing to see. I don't really know how much thought was put into it, other than hey, we can do this now. Let's try it. While we're on that subject, how about this cocaine? I don't know. It's just one of those things. All right. What else can we talk about with this? How do you guys feel about making essentially Mina be the one that kills Dracula here with the whole luring him out into the daylight kind of thing? Because I think that's completely added just for this. Not only the daylight thing, but Mina being the one responsible for it.
Yeah, it was beauty killed the beast. So I'm all for that. I thought it was that, and she doesn't like do it, and she doesn't like have a fist fight with the thing. So she uses its own like what Nosferatu pursues, what it's always after, and she uses that very thing against him. I thought it was pretty well done.
Okay.
I liked I like the idea because you mentioned earlier that like there's a subversion when it's not the strong, young, sexy guy who kills the bad guy, that it's the old guy who's not an action hero. But in this movie, like Abraham Van Helsing is probably the least important character in the movie, and it's the woman who finds out in the Book of the Vampire that it's the woman, if she holds him till dawn, something about the cock of the crow. I don't remember exactly what it was, but and so I like the idea of that's a different approach to how to kill the monster. But if I was going to nitpick, I would say they should have introduced this plot point earlier in the movie, because it's like the last third of the movie where she's like, oh, I'm going to read the book, and then it shows that about like the woman can kill the monster. And I was thinking, oh, I wish they had like mentioned that earlier in the movie. Kind of you hear about Chekhov's gun, like introduce the gun in Act 1 before you fire it in Act 3.
Yeah.
Well, what's particularly weird about that is they keep the method for defeating Dracula from the book. They keep it in the movie and introduce it in the Chekhov's gun style, but they don't use it to kill. It's like they introduce Chekhov's gun and stab the character instead. Wherein like you see Orlok loading up the earth. The book mentions that a vampire needs to have the earth in which they were buried in order to survive. Like you see all that stuff. that's to set up that the way to kill Dracula is to to salt his earth or whatever. But instead, like, they just go with this other method of killing him, and it's entirely for the copyright avoidance. And it's probably a better ending. I don't know. There's something more dramatic about the sun defeating the creature of darkness than, like, the kind of convoluted, confusing bit of destroying the earth. Like, that. How weird is it that the original way to kill Dracula from the book, salting the earth, never fucking works in adaptation? Never. It's always something else. And so it's weird to think about in those terms, but I don't know, it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing really exciting about salting dirt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I've ever seen a version where they even try that.
It's in Bram Stoker's Dracula, the movie.
Oh. Okay.
I should really just start calling that Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, because that's what it is.
It's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
But it's not Bram Stoker's Dracula is the whole problem with the movie.
Speaking of, you mentioned that's a remake of this. That movie kind of has, the woman is instrumental in destroying the vampire in that.
Yeah.
That's kind of right from this. You mentioned that earlier.
That's a good comparison. I hadn't even thought of that, actually. That's true. Mina or Nina or whatever. I like to call her just Mina.
Ellen.
Yeah. She's the one who destroys them in both stories. I hadn't thought of it because it's different. Like, she kills him with a sword, and the Francis Ford Coppola one. There's a lot to be said for Coppola's version, where it takes a lot of what we knew from Dracula, from like the classic Lugosi one, Hammer, the Christopher Lee one, and merges it with the Nosferatu one. I feel like that's the first like major Dracula film that did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a bit of a conglomeration of a lot of things. It's always bugged the crap out of me that it's trying to sell itself as the novel on film, and it's more just a conglomeration of the film versions with some stuff from the novel put in it, and so it just makes it this weird mess of a movie in some ways. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, we've done a Geeky Gentleman on that. You can go watch it if you want. So I don't know, it's a weird thing to think about. It's a weird it's just interesting. Dracula's got quite a history on film, I think. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Because almost like it's weird. Dracula's kind of just a vampire in his own story. There's not like any real significance to him as any kind of like king of vampires or anything in the original story in a lot of the original films. But we've given him that status over the years. You look at stuff like Blade Trinity or Batman versus the Dracula, things that have kind of adapted Dracula into other mediums, and they make Dracula such an important character for the vampire race, as opposed to, no, he's just another one in his own story.
Yeah. In this and in several other versions of the story, like, he's so low on the totem pole that he doesn't, like, he says, "Oh, my servants are all asleep." I don't think this guy has servants. I think he's just like, I'm gonna pretend like I'm my own servant, and I'm gonna go pick him up, and then I'm gonna run around the castle and come back and say, "Hey, it's me again." Like, he's kind of pathetic, really. I mean, he's still a scary vampire, but he's not. You're right. He's not the Lord of Monsters or whatever. That he doesn't have that status that he does in a lot of stories where Dracula's not the center of the story. Like, like Buffy, or like stories that use him, but it's not a Dracula story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really funny.
I just don't get the idea. Why would you let they're servants? They don't get to go to sleep if the master's waiting up, right? Like, just anyway. It's such a blatant lie.
He'd be great on social media.
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh,
Creating other accounts to like his posts.
Oh yeah, he would totally like his own posts.
Hashtag, one account's Dracula, the other's Nosferatu, one's Vlad, the other's Orlek. And they're all just agreeing with each other.
Speaking of this guy being kind of a loser, like he doesn't even have 3 wives like most versions of Dracula do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, look at him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He looks like the penis of a hairless cat.
It really does.
Oh man. Oh.
They need to if they do it DVD re-release, that needs to be on the DVD cover. Like the quote on the back.
The Geeky Gentleman edition. There we go. Oh man. All right. Well, I'm kind of running out of things that I have to say about this. Oh wait, I actually do something else. So, all right.
Okay.
I talked a little bit about some of the silliness of silent film that have kind of artifacts of this. The one thing that I don't think has ever been even remotely acceptable, because like a lot of the other problems are technological limitations. The thing that legit bothers me about silent film is the ridiculous overacting, because like it's just like the one that got me the most laughy in this one was the prison guard with Renfield. Like that dude's face. He's just like randomly crossing his eyes. He's like perking his lips out and just like nodding his head really hard. I'm like, dude, it's not that necessary. Like you're just on film. Just let it be. And there's really no excuse for it because it's not like that's a thing that happened in theater by comparison. Like, yeah, you have to be more expressive on stage, but not to that degree. It was entirely just people not knowing what to do on film, and I always found it funny.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, it's like in The Rocketeer, when the bad guy tells the girl, he says, you have to act like you're not acting, because she's like just being, whoever it was, not the main love interest, but he was someone else that he was in a movie with, and he was like, she was not doing a good job. That makes me think of that. Like, I feel like I was looking, film is not an incredibly new medium at this point. Like, apparently the earliest like feature length movie was 1907. So this was like a skip and a hop away from that, but I guess this was still somewhat new. So people were still like figuring it out maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, people would come from theater where you act to the back of the theater. And also, I think there were a mix of like theater actors and people who weren't actors who just looked the part because obviously they don't have to talk.
Mm-hmm.
So, they have to look right. And also, don't forget, these are silent films. So a lot of times the directors are yelling at them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do this! Get scared! More scared! No, too scared. Back it up. Big!
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. It's I don't know. It's just a funny thing to like look back on. You're like, wow, this guy's really overselling it.
I have to say before we conclude, I don't know. Have we talked a lot about Max Schreck himself?
See, I don't know much about Max Schreck.
Nobody knows much about Max Schreck. There's actually very little information about him. Max Schreck was his actual name, from what I understand. And it is supposed to be a happy accident that it actually has the name does mean terror, and that wasn't like changed, for the film or for his stage performance. That's supposed to be his name. I don't know anything about him, and I think he's just. I mean, the reason why we're talking about this movie tonight has a lot to do with him, and a lot to do with his performance, and yeah, there's a lot of bad overacting, typical of like silent movies. But he moves so inhuman. Like even when he's not in effect, when he's just standing there with his arms like in that weird rat pose or something like that. And then he has those wonderful moments where he's like turning his head and like his eyes seem to turn first and then his head follows. And he and the director both really knew how to work with each other, and they both knew how to milk every creepy second he was on screen.
You can't help but feel like the guy was almost born for the role.
Yeah.
Because obviously they do a lot with makeup, but makeup skills for as far as prosthetics and stuff were not that advanced at this point. So a lot of that's just him really selling it. Similar to like Jim Carrey and like the whole rubber face thing he was able to do for The Mask. A lot of that's just the actor's capability of really warping the face and letting the physical performance shine through.
Yeah. I was reading up on him, like, I think he was still acting on up until like the mid-30s. I don't remember if he died then, or if he just stopped acting at that point. But you're right, like, and this is like an era where like gun to my head, I couldn't tell you about most of these actors. Like, if you asked me about any of them, I wouldn't know a whole lot about them. Like, the woman who played the love interest, I was reading about her, and apparently, like, in 1975, there was a film magazine where they said, yeah, we think she's still alive in Berlin. And, like, they didn't even know. Like, they just didn't know a whole lot about her even then. Like, they weren't sure if she was still alive at that point.
This is back in the 20s where you could just like move to another city and go, you know what, I'm going to be someone else now and get away with it.
Yeah, I guess so. It's kind of crazy.
I killed 4 people in this city. Time to be a new person.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. No, that's definitely on point. Do you think that like the reason that the actors don't really stand out as much in this time is just that it's less about the person because there's, you're literally removing the voice, that there's less personal impact that the actor can bestow and more of it just becomes the film standing on its own? And so like there weren't as many stars back then, or do you think it's something else?
I would disagree with that entirely. There were a lot of stars back then. There like Joan Crawford and Lon Chaney were big
Douglas
stars.
Fairbanks, yeah.
Douglas Fairbanks. The original It Girl was a silent movie star. God, what's her name? Pickford? Mary Pickford? And of course, the comedy stars of the year. The comedy stars of this era just owned, this
Chaplin,
era.
Keaton.
Chaplin,
yeah.
Keaton. And some of them, Fatty Arbuckle, of course. Some of these guys didn't move on when sound came on because, well, their voices sucked. And they couldn't carry. Some could. Some moved on. Some didn't. Where there was a Chaplin and a Joan Crawford and a Lon Chaney. There were a whole bunch that didn't make it. Louise Brooks and stuff like that. So no, I particularly in America film. I think American silent films. You hear a lot more about the stars, and when you talk about like foreign films that during the silent era, you do hear more about the Dr. Caligaris and the Nosferatus. It seemed like the real like artistic filmmakers. Maybe I shouldn't say that because that's maybe a little unfair to American filmmakers, but a lot of them came from other countries, and came over to America, particularly during World War II, during the Nazis. One of the cinematographers on the Lugosi Dracula was a German filmmaker, and I can't remember if he was attached to this film or not. But yeah, I mean, this is how film kind of developed. these certain countries and these certain areas did seem to have things that they could spotlight. And we're watching. A lot of silent films bore me, and I can't sit through. The horror ones I can sit through. And it's interesting to see the building blocks of what we like now kind of come together.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Kind of to, I don't know, like add to what Manos said, I was reading a book. I didn't get to finish reading the book, but it was a few years ago. It was written by William Goldman, and he was talking about like the beginning of the movie industry, how like at the time they didn't even credit the actors. They just would say like, girl on a horse or whatever. and then like someone, and I don't remember who it was, said, I want to take a lower pay rate, but I want my name to be on the movie. And then like some of the I guess partners of the director or whatever were like, are you crazy? Don't do that. And then like within a few years, suddenly like these actors who wanted their names out there were getting paid a lot more because they were suddenly more in the spotlight, I guess. So like that had to have been like at least 10 years before this, but still I want to say that this was like before the time when like you had the mega stars. Like you had people would recognize these names like Lon Chaney and Joan Crawford and I just lost his name, Max Schreck. They would recognize these names, but they weren't as like big and celebrated as celebrities are today, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it went into overdrive during the 30s and 40s. That's where, Hollywood glamour really exploded.
Mm-hmm. And like at this time, like you said, like a movie star, they could be in a pretty big movie. Like the woman in this, she retired for years to be with her family, and like you could just kind of let that happen, and you could still be a big movie star, and then like just kind of fade away. And that would be a lot harder to do now, I guess. I mean, maybe not. Like I know of movies with like a big movie where it's like the actor just like stopped acting, but it seems less likely now.
I don't know. I don't follow a lot of the behind the scenes action too much on films. I just don't have the energy for it, and sometimes I'm always disappointed when I find out, so I don't have much motivation to. So I don't know, a little over my head on that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right, do we want to go ahead and move on to ratings then?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of done. I don't really have anything else I can really bring to the table, I guess.
All right. I'll go ahead and go first because I do think I came off a little negative on this. And again, most of my problems with this movie are not the movie's fault. It came out when it came out. I didn't expect them to do anything about that. They were trying to get away with copyright infringement, and they failed miserably.
They were making a fan film.
Right. Secret fan film review. No, like, I really, a lot of my problems with this movie are on me, not on the film itself. That being said, it's still not perfect. It's still got things like the overacting, but that's just the era, so I'm not really going to hold it against it. And so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 plague rats.
Okay. Manos, do you want to go next?
Sure. It's a classic film, and it is, of course, of the silent era, so your tolerance for the film, might depend on, like, if you can... Stupid city. Anyway, your tolerance for the film might depend on if, you can handle silent movies. Believe me, after seeing handfuls of silent films, this is one of the ones I can watch over and over again. It's absolutely beautiful and creepy and, like, gothic, and one of the one of the innovators as far as like everything we like in horror film. It's really hard. I mean, Max Schreck is still creepy as Nosferatu. The cinematography is gorgeous, and it's a pretty easy story to follow. If you're familiar with Dracula, you can pretty much carry through with it, even if they're not talking. So just out of the historical significance alone, but good lord, just on the artistry, with its aged problems, admittedly, I would still probably give it 5 out of 5 Christopher Walkens.
Okay.
Because he played Max Shrek in Batman
That's right.
Returns.
Yep.
I am gonna give. I really enjoyed this movie. More so, like I said, I thought it was really funny, and I don't think they wanted it to be funny, but I enjoyed it also because of its pop cultural significance. So I'm going to give this 4.5 Books of the Vampire out of 5.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Well, Manos, do you want to join us for next week?
I would love it.
All right. Why don't you pick a horror movie for us to review, sir?
All right. Let's see. Oh boy. I had been. Oh, what's one I? Boy, should we do? Would you guys be interested in doing the Babadook, or? Oh, okay. We'll stop there. I was gonna bring up. A couple. There's like The Void. There's also It Follows. I like all three of those.
We've already done It Follows.
Oh, you have?
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you guys done
Babadook, though-
Suspiria?
I'm sorry, what?
Have you done Suspiria?
No.
Let's see. Would you be joining us, or is it just you and me?
No, it'd be you, myself, and Ruben.
Okay. What do you think, Ruben? Would you rather do Suspiria or the Babadook?
We can do the Babadook.
Done.
I know very little about either one, so I'm in for a surprise.
Okay, great. I love both those films.
Okay, cool. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the philosopher.
I'm the realist.
And I'm the Comics Kid 2099.
And we are your ghouly gentlemen, and we will be discussing things from beyond the grave.
Ha 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 ha!